Last week, I told you why it was a terrible mistake for new Alberta Premier Jason Kenney to hire a longtime carbon tax propagandist named Mark Cameron to be the Deputy Minister of the Policy Office. Today, I'm going to let Mark Cameron tell you why Mark Cameron shouldn't have that job, using an interview he gave with Ezra Levant back in 2016. A week ago, actually, the very last day of April, Alberta Premier Jason Kenney was sworn in alongside one of the most competent cabinets in Alberta's history. Now, as a small C Conservative, I'm very happy and very excited for what should be the great summer of repeal here in Alberta, the weeding out of all of Rachel Notley's bad ideas, bad taxes, bad regulations, and of course, bad patronage appointments. And that is why I was just so disappointed to see that Jason Kenney had appointed a man named Mark Cameron to be the Deputy Minister of the Policy Coordination Office. Cameron's a hire that, if made by Rachel Notley, Conservatives would be absolutely furious about. You see, despite Jason Kenney promising that the repeal of the carbon tax would be his very first bill, his Bill 1, he's hired Cameron, someone who spent about the last half-decade or so at Canadians for Clean Prosperity, advocating for carbon taxes in Alberta, for cap and trade in Ontario, and a nationwide carbon tax for the rest of you. It's antithetical to the promises that Jason Kenney made to Albertans in the campaign. Now, you can see my initial video about who and what Canadians for Clean Prosperity is and their ties to the network to block Canadian oil and gas at firecameron.com. Now, back in 2016, Ezra actually had Mark Cameron on his nightly show, the Ezra Levant Show, where the two fellows discussed Canadians for Clean Prosperity. And then Cameron tried to make the conservative case for carbon taxes, which is a really crazy phrase when you try to say it out loud. Now, normally, Ezra's show is sitting behind a paywall, but I think it's important for you to see it and for you to see the things that Mark Cameron said in that interview. And we are also posting his interview in full on YouTube so that you can see it for yourself. And you'll see that I'm not taking anything out of context or deceptively editing anybody's words. And the show, well, it was more of a debate than an interview, but it was a very good-natured one. And Ezra was very complimentary towards Cameron, whom Ezra admits he's known for a very long time. Actually, that comes up in the debate a little later on, which was sort of fun, and I'll show that to you too. So let's get right into it. From the very beginning of the debate, they go back and forth about the science of climate change. And after that, then they get into the policy of carbon taxes. And that's important, the policy angle. Given that Cameron is the new head policy wonk for Jason Kenney, right? We can debate whether CO2 is the control knob or how much of a control knob it is for global temperature all day long. But what's important is how one thinks Canada's tiny emission levels play into that idea and what we should, or even better, shouldn't do about any of it. Right off the bat, Cameron calls a carbon tax a desirable way to have taxation. So Ezra asks him why. Here.
Are you supporting a carbon tax just because you're one of those unicorns, a conservative for taxes? Or are you someone who believes that this carbon tax will change the climate?
I believe that it can change consumer behavior and industrial behavior, which can reduce CO2 emissions. Changing the climate is obviously a bigger task. Canada can't do that alone. But if there was a global price on carbon, or at least in the industrialized countries, then yes, it would change the climate.
Okay, so you think that bringing a carbon tax in Canada would change the climate?
Not in and of itself.
I mean, even if all the countries in the world brought in a carbon tax, even if China suddenly decided, India, all these countries which have explicitly said they're not going to.
Yeah.
How much would that change the climate?
If all the major industrialized countries brought in carbon pricing at sufficient levels, you probably would be able to hold the carbon dioxide concentrations below 450 and hold the temperature change below 2 degrees. It would be a huge challenge geopolitically, but I think it is possible.
Now, in this next clip, Mark Cameron says things that we've heard leave the mouth of Trudeau's Environment Minister, Catherine McKenna, with regard to China. This assumption that China would somehow all of a sudden slow down their own industrialization and development and then follow the suit of the Western world simply because Canadians have chosen to harm their own economy in favor of carbon taxes. It's truly madness. It's the failed idea of social license, but instead, like on a global scale. Just watch this.
Even if the whole world got involved, the world's still going to go up in temperature by several degrees. And I think you're conceding that if we act alone, there will be no difference in the world's climate. Why should we tax ourselves and destroy our most prosperous industry when we know for a fact that even if we accept I'm skeptical of your science, but I'm not going to be mean to you. Even if we accept your theory is contingent on China saying, yeah, we're not going to industrialize. We know they're going to.
Yeah. Well, two reasons. One, I think Canada does have a global responsibility, and that countries like China and India, they look at what countries like Canada and the U.S. and Australia do. It's a game, game theory. They're tit for tat. They're looking at what other actors do. So I think that does have.
Why aren't they looking at us and sort of laughing that we would tax ourselves?
No, I mean I think China is actually, they've got a huge smog problem in China, so they are actually beginning to deal with this for reasons maybe other than climate.
Dioxide.
But shutting down coal plants will have the same effect.
So you think China's going to shut down coal?
I think they want to produce a lot less coal in the industrial regions of China because it's basically killing their own people, and they know that.
So now you think but they're opening up new coal-fired power plants every week.
Sure. I mean, China's got huge energy needs, but China is actually moving to less carbon-intensive forms of energy.
But hang on, are they opening new coal-fired power plants, or are they not?
They are, but they're also opening more nuclear, more renewables, more everything else.
Okay, so they're not reducing their carbon footprint.
They're reducing their carbon intensity. They're not reducing their overall carbon emissions.
In fact, the amount of carbon they're going to increase is going to triple over the next 50 years.
Those numbers are, well, I'm not sure about triple, but they're certainly projected to go up till about 2030.
So tax Canada while China grows and then just hope China comes along eventually. The Western world has been, pretty unsuccessful at getting China to adopt things like basic human rights, but we're going to convince them of the value of carbon taxes? Sure. Now, in this next clip, Ezra actually gets Cameron to admit a carbon tax will do really nothing here.
Will you concede, in closing this first segment, that the carbon tax you propose in Canada will not make any difference to the climate at all?
Well, as I say, the difference it could make would be as part of a global agreement, not in and of itself.
I mean, since there is no global.
Well, there's the Paris Accords, which obviously all countries have taken.
But that's not an agreement to reduce emissions. That's just an agreement to report.
It's every country has taken targets of what they're going to try to reduce.
So will you agree with me that if Canada were to bring in a carbon tax, it would not change the world's climate at all?
On itself, yes, absolutely.
You would agree with me?
Yes.
All right. I thank you for that concession.
And in this next clip, Cameron concedes what we all know to be true, that the carbon tax, by any name, is just a revenue raiser for governments, not some thermometer for the weather here.
How could a conservative propose that?
If you agree that there has to be taxes on something, I think most conservatives would agree that taxing consumption is better than taxing income or taxing work.
Don't we already have a GST, though?
We have a GST, but our GST is 5%. Our income taxes, the top marginal rates are about 48%.
So why wouldn't we just raise the GST?
Well, a lot of conservative economists have proposed that.
Would you agree with that?
If it could be done as a tax shift from income taxes, perhaps I would. But carbon taxes are another way of making a shift from taxing income and taxing saving and taxing investment to taxing consumption.
So Cameron admits he sees your home heating or your driving to work or having your lights on and your refrigerator running on the same level as he sees cigarette smoking or boozing. It's bad behavior to be taxed as opposed to a basic necessity of Canadian life. In this next clip, Ezra has a sudden memory. He worked with Cameron to fight Kyoto, to fight against liberal climate taxes over a decade or so ago. Ezra calls him out on this apparent hypocrisy for adopting liberal ideas now that he once fought against here.
So you and I was a volunteer in the Tory War Room in 2008. It was one of the best experiences of my life. And you and I think, fought against Stefan Dion's green shift. So what are you doing now? What was your transformation?
Well, two things. At that time, we were talking about a cap and trade deal with the United States. That was also part of the platform of the Conservative Party in 2008. We didn't like Stefan Dion's green shift because it was essentially an income transfer from Alberta and resource-producing regions to Quebec and the Maritimes, which we didn't agree with. And there was a lot of social spending that was being done there. If they had done a BC-style carbon tax, it would have been much more difficult to criticize.
Oh, I see. As long as the government takes my money through carbon taxes but doesn't send it to Quebec and the Maritimes, but rather puts it into whatever pet project climate wizardry our current jet-setting Environment Minister Catherine McKenna thinks is okay, then this newfangled version of Stefan Dion's green shift plan is also okay. Got it. Now, this next part is very interesting. The boss wants to know who funds Canadians for Clean Prosperity, and there is no real answer from Cameron. You see, Clean Prosperity is a nonprofit and not a charity, so they don't have to say who funds them. But Cameron assures Ezra none of the money is foreign. Okay, fine, that's good news, but then Ezra presses Cameron on his lobbying activities. Here.
I am beholden to no one. There is no single donor to our company here who has given us more than 2% of our annual revenue, and I'm not a lobbyist. Are you a lobbyist?
I am registered as a lobbyist in several provinces, yes.
How about the federal government?
I'm, to some extent, I'm a federal lobbyist as well. Most of our work has been at the provincial level.
Okay, but are you registered as a federal lobbyist?
Not currently, but I am registered in Ontario and I believe in Alberta.
Did you catch that part about Cameron being a registered lobbyist in a couple of different provinces? One of those was Alberta, meaning this new hire in Jason Kenney's policy office lobbied the Alberta government in favor of Notley's carbon tax. Now, finally, Ezra asks one more time about who funds Clean Prosperity here.
We don't have an obligation as a not-for-profit. If we were a charity, we would have an obligation to report. We don't report on our donors. All I will tell you is that we don't receive any corporate, foundation, or government support.
So these are individual tycoons, and you say they're Canadian. Is any money coming through some sort of third-party launderer? No
money's coming from other countries.
So
no money's coming from Tides.
How many guys?
There are basically 5 or 6 high net worth people who've given money.
So 5 guys kicking in 6 figures each. You don't think you should disclose that just so people know who? I mean, wouldn't that make your case stronger? Because you could say, look, here's who's behind me. I'm telling you I believe this stuff. I'm telling you I believe the science. I believe the economics. I believe the politics. And I'm confident that you'll trust that I believe in this because I'm not hiding who's behind me. Like, doesn't that undermine you? I believe you. I want to believe you because I want to believe you're just a wayward conservative and we're on opposite ends of the spectrum and we can have a tug of war. But if you're not telling me who's funding you, how can I get rid of my doubts that a good, honest man who's now whose party is in opposition needs to make a living to pay for his beautiful family, and he's found 5 high net worth people.
There's other ways I could be making a living. I had a good job before I was doing this job. This is not about money. The people who are donating to this cause are donating because they believe in the cause.
And one guy happens to have investments in green tech. Who are the other guys? Are they political? Would they be public names?
A couple of them. I wouldn't say any of them are public names. A couple of them would be more widely known than others.
So this is just a front group for 5 Canadian moguls who want to put carbon taxes on your minivan? Now again, I reiterate, I'm not deceptively editing anything here, and you can watch the video in full for yourself on our YouTube channel. And like Ezra, I'm absolutely certain that Mark Cameron is a good man and a decent human being. He comes across as very, very nice, and I have never, ever heard anything about Mark Cameron that would suggest otherwise. My point is that being nice and smart doesn't uniquely qualify Cameron for the job in the policy office. I'm arguing that his history advocating for carbon taxes right up until about 2 weeks ago when he left Canadians for Clean Prosperity should be disqualifying of Cameron. Mark Cameron has never renounced his support of carbon taxes as quote-unquote good taxation policy. It's not like Cameron had some sort of come to Jesus moment. and came back into the mainstream conservative fold with regard to the opinions that somehow taxes change the weather. Cameron just quit talking about it 2 weeks ago because he knew that he would receive this generous patronage appointment from his old friend Jason Kenney, and that stinks. It's the kind of thing that Alison Redford and Rachel Notley did all the time. And it's the kind of thing Albertans resoundingly rejected in this last election. That's why I have a petition to fire him at firecameron.com. You can sign it there, and you can view my previous video on this topic. I'm a conservative, and I'm cheering for Jason Kenney to keep his promises because Albertans need him to keep his promises. And he needs to reinstill investor confidence in Alberta immediately after Notley and her carbon tax scared all the investors away. And someone like Mark Cameron at the policy office just doesn't do that, does he? If you agree with me that Jason Kenney needs to find someone more closely aligned with the anti-carbon tax values that sent Jason Kenney to the office of the Premier, and that he needs to fire Mark Cameron, go to firecameron.com. For the Rebel.media, I'm Sheila Gunn Reid. Albertans and the entire country need Jason Kenney to immediately go about the business of undoing all the damage Rachel Notley inflicted on this beautiful province. And that's why Jason Kenney needs to rethink the hiring of a pro-carbon tax lobbyist named Mark Cameron to be his deputy minister in the policy office. To see my full report and to sign the petition, go to firecameron.com.